Stories from Real Life is a production of Media Well Done, LLC.
Welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. On today's show, we learn how a frightened child transforms into a frontline healer for over 5 decades. Our guest is Jasin Ensley, a woman who has seen the best and worst of the human condition from the bedside. We're diving into a 54-year career in healthcare, the secret to writing across every genre, and why she never stopped promising her patients, "I won't leave you alone." This is Stories from Real Life, and today's story is Jasin Ensley's The Tire Swing.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. This is episode 199, and I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining us for the podcast where real stories are so much more interesting than fiction, like this one. This episode will highlight Jasin Ensley's unique intersection of a 54-year nursing career and her prolific literary output, ranging from gritty memoirs like The Tire Swing to children's books and young adult fiction. Our guest today is Jasin Ensley, and she couldn't wait to get started telling us about all of her stories, so I let her go ahead and take the lead.
There are so many, but I'm going to give you an example. When I was a child of 4 and 5, I hid in the closet. I was used to doing that even from crib. My father was quite forceful and a little bit, he would attack in different ways. And I think I grew up trying to protect my mother and protect my sisters. And that led into my profession of being a nurse. I started out to be a physician, and a long, long life of success, a lot of fun, some abuse, reaction to abuse, some problems with attachment disorder, and also feeling that I wasn't worthy enough. So that led into writing The Tire Swing, which tells that story in many, many episodes.
Okay, let's go just before that. Well, let's talk about your first writing that you remember. You wrote a poem for your mother when you were 5 years old. Do you still have that poem? And what did it teach you about the power of words?
I remember writing the poem. I learned to read when I was 4 years old. So I put the letters together, and it probably wasn't spelled correctly, but I remember telling my mother, "I love you with all my heart. I wish I knew how to start to tell you what you mean to me. Please believe I love you free, more and more than I can say. Please always stay." That was about 7 or 8 years old. First poem I ever wrote.
That's nice. So there is a scene in your memoir involving a burn victim where you promise, "I won't leave you alone." How did you maintain that level of emotional stamina over a 5+ decade nursing career that included hospice care?
I believe that was the moment. I was a freshman in nurses training. There was a tragic airplane crash. And so these burn victims were taken to our hospital. There wasn't a unit or an ICU. Coming from babysitting, the doctor said, "I'm taking you to ER, you're going to work." And I was terrified. But as soon as I felt the touch of someone that needed me, that just struck a place in my heart. I grabbed a hold of a doctor. I thought he was an aide. "Get me some Demerol. I need to start an IV." I'd never touched a needle in my life. And there was a calm that came over me, even though I was anxious, not too sure of what I was doing. Looked in the young man's eyes. His name was Ken. He had burned his throat and everything, and a good share of his body. And he tried to say something to me, and I bent down and he said, "Don't let me die." And I said, I am your nurse. I'm going to give you something for pain and start an IV. I will do everything to keep you alive."
Did he survive?
That he survived for about 2 months there at the hospital and passed away. But while he was here, I got to take care of him as well on an orthopedic unit. And he gave me a silver football. This was a football player group that got in a crash. Gave me a silver football on a chain. And I kept that for so many years. And that is, as I moved many places, I lost it, but it's still in my heart.
So was this the Marshall University football situation?
It was Cal Poly.
Okay.
It was a small plane that it was pure fog that night. We couldn't even see when we were driving to get to the airport. And evidently the gentleman who was the pilot had a suspended license or something was wrong with him. Even the coach said, should you really take off in this? And he did. And he missed when he was coming down the runway to take off. He hit something on the edge, turned the plane over, chopped it in two, and the back end was full of young men who died immediately. And then we had 12 at Toledo Hospital. There was one other hospital, St. Vincent's, and they took the other 5. So the Cal Poly, they had won the football game. It was just amazing. It was.
Wow. So you mentioned your first assignment was that young man, and you grabbed a doctor thinking it was someone else. So how has the healthcare landscape changed the most since you first started till now?
I'll give you 3 examples. The first one is the observation skills were prime. That was very important. So we didn't have computers. We barely had phone. The phones didn't work as well. And so communication and observation were skills that you had to hone. They gave you a lot of activities that you could learn different types of patients and early on. And I always kept that and felt that was very important. I think we've kind of lost that. Even though the computer and all of the information we can get and research is excellent, I worry about that, losing that organization skill. Another thing is the patient ratio to the nursing staff. That is all over the map. Depends on what state you're in, what they've bargained for with taxes and all of those things. Plus the insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies didn't have as much power as they do now. Yes, they've given us tons of information. Those things are much better. Many more medications are available. So it's kind of a balance between those things. As far as touching the patient, the nursing staff, RNs themselves, have so many rules and screens that they have to complete that are so long. We had one sheet of paper that had 3 or 4 different columns, and you got the whole picture of the day for that patient because we were in the room taking care of the patient. Now the nurses have multiple duties, a lot of equipment that you have to know and understand. So they have that level, a little more technical. And then the nursing aides, if you have them, or the LPNs, staff, get more touching with the patient. So those are the 3 differences I see.
All right. Obviously, nursing, especially hospice nursing, is a really high-stakes environment. So how did you find out that writing was a form of decompressing for yourself?
Since I was about 4 years old when I started to read, I loved having something in my hand. And we didn't have any toys. Even in my playpen, they threw papers and stuff. So I always scribbled. And something about that, because we had kind of a difficult childhood, something about putting myself down on paper, even if it didn't make sense at the time, I think that began honing that inside of me, and the passion for writing. Since I wrote that poem, I wrote all the time. Maybe it didn't rhyme, maybe it wasn't any good. And then over the years, different events that occurred that were difficult to deal with, I always wrote. And when I put it on paper, it seemed different than what I was actually thinking in my mind. So that was very helpful. Plus, it took me that moment to kind of pull back, take a deep breath, and deal with my feelings that were going on inside of me.
All right. So what's the biggest lesson you learned as a hospice nurse in hospice care?
It was amazing. I'll tell you. One of the things I learned was they can hear you, even if they're in a coma or the last stages of dying. Touching the patient, being with the patient, talking with the patient, even telling them a joke, even if they weren't aware or they're confused or in a coma or in a state where you think they can't hear you, but it makes all the difference in the world. I'll give you an example. There was a woman, she was in the last stages of dying, which her breathing is irregular and everything. Her whole family was there, almost everyone, they thought. They were just, it was a week. They were having a terrible time. And I said, she's waiting for someone. She's waiting. A phone call came through, and it was her granddaughter. They put the phone up to her. She was not responding, but she still was breathing. And the granddaughter says, Grandma, I love you. I'm so sorry that I can't be there. Within 10 minutes, it almost looked like she smiled and relaxed, took a couple more breaths, and passed away. Amazing. And so those things, there's energy in the room. You can't kill energy. And that's what I learned, that they sense some energy in the room. If they're getting ready to see someone, a lot of times they'll say, Joe, thank you for coming. And Joe is dead, or Joe is not even near there. And they see or feel someone there.
Wow, that's really fascinating.
It is. It's amazing.
You write lots of different kinds of things, from intense memoirs to children's books, like Isla and the Imaginary Iguana. How do you shift your mindset between such different audiences?
I am so fortunate to have great grandkids and teenagers and every level in my grandkids and great grandkids. When I play with them, I turn into this kid and I can think like them. Isla is my granddaughter. Her name is Isla, and she would put her hands on her hip and say, I'm Isla, and you don't say the S. And I thought, I have got to write a book about that. And she was very thrilled. And the iguana, she says, that's not an iguana, Grandma. That's a alligator. That was her favorite toy. But I said, I have to have a lot of eyes. So I'm sorry I called him an iguana. But that helps me. I love teenagers. I've worked with them at church functions, all kinds of things. Plus, I have a teaching degree, and I taught at Bedford High School for 5 years. And then I also taught nursing students, and I taught coding and taught doctors. So I taught everybody in different levels of their life.
You mentioned loving teenagers. You wrote a high-stakes young adult thriller that's called Orphans.
Yes.
And it involves a terrorist plot. What was the inspiration for that book?
I always loved Huckleberry Finn and his adventures. And I always loved the two boys that were so different from each other. So these two young protagonists that are in there, one is from this area in Ohio, the other from Florida. They both experience very different tragedies, but the loss of not knowing where their parents are. And I thought, I started with that. When I do my outline, I always do a start and an ending, and then fill it in so it works. So I wanted them to go on a lot of adventures and be more modern. So that just put me in that. And I usually write at midnight, from midnight till 3. So I'm a little crazy at that time, so it can be crazy. My notes can be crazy.
Yeah, you got to write when the inspiration hits. I have a book that's coming out soon. Actually, this is coming out the week this episode is released. So,
wonderful.
And my writing mostly took place between 3 a.m. and 8 a.m.
Good for you. Isn't that amazing?
My mind was the most active, and normally it's always active at that time, but normally I don't have the inspiration to write something. But I had to write it then because I knew if I went back to sleep, I would forget it. So I didn't want to take that chance.
No, you don't. No, you have to do it when you can. I'd love to read your book, so let me know.
I will. I'll send you a link. So your work touches on the concept of metamorphosis. So
Yes.
What's the kind of personal why is the idea of personal transformation so central to your own storytelling?
I'll give you, my whole life story is so long, but I'll tell you about the things, and this is very personal. Having been abused as a child, and it was very difficult. My father outside of the house was very handsome, very popular, very treasured. He was a photographer, so we lived in a small town, and I couldn't get that. I couldn't connect why. So I think early on, I thought it was my fault because I was the rescuer. I would run after, try to jump on him when he would mistreat my mother. So that started that. So the caretaking person that was inside me kind of blossomed. I had a baby. I became pregnant when I was 14, and the counselors that I've had over time, the one, he got very close, and I never knew who did that. I was dating someone, but we never had anything happen that way, but I kind of blamed him. It was my father. And so I had an abortion. I almost died. Had it at some person that God would never, ever say they should do that. And so I lost the baby. So I always felt guilty. So that added that to kind of an abandonment thing. My mother would often leave a note, say, I can't take it anymore, but I'll be back. So the abandonment issue started. Okay, so those things happened. But I always had a sense of humor, and I always collected a group of people I could trust. So there's that person fighting that person. So that went on for years. I got married when I went to be a physician in Ohio State. I had a scholarship to go there, and my first passion was to be a physician. I had to leave after my first year. Something happened to my mother. I came home to take care of her. And in the meantime, I thought maybe I'll go be a nurse while I'm waiting to be a doctor, and then I'll be nice to the nurses. I made sure I'm nice. They were a little tough when I went through training. And so I did that. I'm so blessed. I always had a faith. We were Catholic, which was really odd. My dad was here's this wonderful guy ushering everybody around, very advanced in the church. And then at home, this different person. I never knew what the dichotomy was. So anyhow, then I got married, had 3 kids, married a pharmacist. I had graduated from nurses training, and in the 60s, I graduated in 62, we married in 63, had first son in 63. In the 60s, as you probably know, when your husband said you will stay home and you'll take care of the children and that's what you'll do, you did it. I mean, that's what you did. So I wasn't allowed to work. He was an only child. He was abusive. We went through that, got a divorce after 13 years. I was introduced to alcohol then. Evidently, I have that gene in my family for 5 years. After my kids were probably 11, 13, and 9, it was an awful period in my life. Let's say that. Almost died having my second child, almost committed suicide at one point in time. The cat saved my life, believe it or not, jumped on the car. I had no concept that I was doing that. Came sober for 42 years.
Congratulations.
Tons of support, multiple support, amazing. And I've come full circle to go through all those things. There are many other things in my book, but there's humor in there too. And thank God for that. My mother always had a great sense of humor. She was a concert pianist, graduated from Juilliard when she was 17, and a fabulous woman. Yeah. And my father was brilliant. So that's it in a nutshell.
Wow. Very
I'm
interesting.
I morphed into what I am now.
Well, one of your interests apparently is the vaudeville era, and you wrote a short story called "A Penny for Your Thoughts."
Yes.
What is it about that historical era that drew your attention?
I love history. I love the 17th century. I like the 1900s. I was in a variety show for many years, dancing and comedy acts and all that stuff. And one of my directors was this woman named Muriel, and she had been raised in vaudeville. And she taught us how to dance and do group things, all those things. And she was amazing. And she was a great part of my support system. And I said, I have to write something about her. And she had told me her life story. So we went through that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was.
What role does your King Charles Cavalier dog play in your creative process?
Well, Lucy has passed away. Now we have Bella. King Charles, I love rescue. I'm always rescuing something. One or the other. It doesn't matter what it is. And Lucy was a rescue pup. She died of renal failure, but she knew she could find out I had had skin cancer. She could find that better than the doctor. I said, you need to look at these lesions. We have a familial disease that's very rare. And so she was like my little doctor. And I told the dermatologist, I said, I think you want Lucy to come and work for you. But she was a fabulous dog, just a delight for me. Any surgery I had or John had, she would be right at your side. And now Bella is too. She's a rescue from a puppy mill in Detroit. Never got to take care of her babies, and she loves children. She's about 15 right now, but she's fabulous. So,
awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Well, let's talk about your nursing career a little bit more. So for someone currently in the healthcare field who feels burned out, what's the best advice you can offer them for finding sort of a second act in creativity like you did?
Writing is one of the things I tell them to do, even if they've never written before, or, audio, put on audio things the way that you can, so that you hear yourself, you hear your own voice. When I'm talking to you, I hear a voice, but it is not the voice you hear back at you. And all of a sudden you hear someone different. It's like you're talking to your inner self. Writing is very important. Always be honest with who your supervisors are. If you need to sit down, and don't be afraid to sit down, not whining, but sit down and put down together a plan of action that will allow you to stay in your job. Because if you're afraid to talk to your supervisor or whomever is above you, you will harbor that anger, and you might not be as good a nurse as you could be because you need to be that way, or you'll leave your job. And that would be terrible. So having been a supervisor as well as as an employee, I always gave them time. I said, my door is open to you. You just have to let me know when you're coming. and I would give them a plan of action. I said, let's work on a plan together. I said, you and I are partners in this. We need to be able to take care of our patients, and we can't do it if we're harboring, bad feelings. So that's always been good. If you decide, if you're burned out, and there are several that you can't fight that burnout, you need to take a sabbatical, leave for a while, find the pressures in your own personal life that are contributing to your anxiety, and work that out somehow with support systems, with a physician, whomever you can. Take a trip, go somewhere, walk on the beach. I can do guided imagery. So I'm talking to you right now, but I'm walking on the beach. I love the ocean, and you would never know it, but it helps me be less anxious, less critical of myself, all of that. Yes, if you can use one of those new tools, there are many of them. If a lot of people in healthcare turn to medication to treat their anxiety, I said, once you start deciding that's what you need more than anything, that's the last option, and you must have somebody helping you take care of yourself that way. So that's my deal in a nutshell.
That's good advice there. So what's the most surprising reaction from a reader who finished reading your book, The Tire Swing?
My middle child, Susan, she's the one where I had an out-of-body experience. They lost my pressure, and she was a big girl, and I had her naturally, and she was the middle child. She's brilliant. She's a pharmacist like her father, and she always felt that when she read the book, she said, well, there isn't enough of me in there. It's typical of the middle child to get ignored. And I didn't say anything so what I did is what I usually do. I wrote a poem about the middle child, and I let her know that you have support in front and behind you. And I said, I love you as much as I love my other kid, in a whole different way, because you're a whole different person. And I said, there's no balancing. There's no how many loves you say to this one. You can't add up things. There's a mathematical way to love your children. So she read that, and she was pretty caustic. I used different names in the book, unless they told me I could use their own names. And I used her name. So when I did a rebrand of the book, I told a little bit more about her, which helped. That helped. But she was the one that had the most surprising. I was shocked. But I told them to be honest. I said, if I made mistakes or if I overdid something, you never know. And so I'm willing to get that critique.
Okay. So I just have a couple questions left as we start to wind down the conversation. You mentioned that you're a mother, grandmother, and a great-grandmother.
Yes.
So how has your family influenced the themes of protection and courage in your books?
Taking care of little ones. When you are older, like I am in the winter of my life, since I'm such a caretaker, it's difficult when they say, "Oh, Grandma, the car seat, that's kind of hard to get, that you are diminished in a way, and that isn't their reason to do that." So being able to play with those kids, being able to be alive and enjoy my grandchildren who are having their children, it's keeping me going. And I love it. I'm so blessed to be able to do that, to be able to attend things with them, their games, and embarrass them by yelling and screaming their names. All of that. I pray. I have a very strong faith. And I always pray for them that, they hold on to something. My grandson was in Las Vegas, and he was Catholic all his life, went to college and everything, but he kind of lost that sense of the religion part of it. And he said, Grandma, I've got this feeling in my chest I should go home. What should I do? And I said, go get a piece of paper, put pros and cons on what to do. And I said, are you praying about it? He said, no, I don't do that anymore. He said, but I have this feeling in my chest. I said, that's the force. Why don't you just call it the force? So to be able to do something like that, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So it's the final question today. Let's go back again to when you were a little girl and you wrote your first poem. If you could go back and see that little girl, what would you tell her about her future? What her future would look like?
Okay. First, I'm going to say, honey, if you look in the mirror every morning, you should smile and say, you can be funny. You can be anything you want to be today, anything you hope to do. Because God has you, He made you. And just find something pretty about you that you love. If you like your nose or eyes, just do something like that. Plus, I love what you wrote. Keep doing that. If you have a passion, follow it. Find who can help you support you in that. And always take time for yourself. That's not selfish. And always be kind. Forgiveness is very important. You don't want to hang on to being mad at something. Find out why you are and just work it out. It's a lot. And laugh a lot. You need a lot of laughter. Even if you're crying, you need to laugh. That's it. Pretty much.
Great way to wind down the episode today. So my guest today has been Nancy Jasin Ensley. Nancy, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, Mel, and I'll read your book. That sounds great. Thank you. So for listeners who want to find out how to read your books, there will be links to your website and to your books in the show notes. So I encourage you to pick up a copy of one or more of her books when you get the chance. So that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Until next time, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.